Before I say a single word, Your Honor, I need to submit something to the court." The room went still. My brother's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Holloway, stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me the way people look at a stray dog that just wandered into a fine restaurant. My brother, Raymond, was seated across the conference table from me, and for just a moment, that rehearsed look of sorrow he had been wearing since our mother's funeral last month slipped. Not much. Just enough. I had been watching for it. There were 6 people in that room at Holloway and Associates on a gray Tuesday morning in November. My brother, his wife, Connie, their attorney, my attorney, a semi-retired estate lawyer named Gerald Fitch, who I had found through a friend of a friend and who had told me, very plainly, when I first walked into his office 3 months ago, that what I was describing sounded like elder financial abuse and that I should not sign a single piece of paper until he told me to. I hadn't. Everyone in that room expected me to sit down, accept the terms of the amended will Raymond had presented to the probate court, and walk away with the one thing he had generously left me: a cardboard box of my mother's old photographs and her sewing kit. After 43 years of our mother's life, after everything she had built with my father before he passed, after the hardware store and the house on Clearwater Drive and the retirement savings and the investment account she had quietly grown for 3 decades, Raymond and Connie believed they were walking out of that room with all of it. They were wrong. Gerald set a manila folder on the table with the calm of a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms and no longer felt anything resembling nerves. He folded his hands on top of it. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "we have documentation we believe the court needs to review before any transfers are executed." Patricia Holloway looked at the folder the way you look at something you weren't supposed to see. Then she looked at Raymond. And my brother, for the first time in as long as I could remember, looked genuinely afraid. I want to tell you how I got here, because this story does not start in that conference room. It starts 40 years earlier, in a hardware store on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, with a man named Walter Briggs, my father, showing me how to read a set of blueprints and telling me that the most valuable thing a man could ever own was his word. My name is Douglas Briggs. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a facilities manager for a mid-size manufacturing company outside Columbus before I retired 2 years ago. I am not a wealthy man, and I never tried to be. My father raised Raymond and me with the same values. Work hard, tell the truth, take care of your family. I believed those things. I still do. Raymond believed them too, once. Or maybe he only pretended to, and I was never paying close enough attention to notice the difference. Our father died in 2009. Heart attack, 67 years old, still coming in to open the store on Saturday mornings because he said he couldn't stand being at home without something to do. He left the hardware store and the house to our mother, Evelyn, which was right and proper. She had worked alongside him for 40 years. She had earned every square foot of it. Raymond and I were named as co-executors of whatever remained when she eventually passed. That was the plan. That was what the will said. For the first several years after my father died, things were fine. My mother was sharp and independent, still drove herself to church every Sunday, still hosted the neighborhood Christmas party she had been throwing since 1987. Raymond lived 40 minutes away in Kettering. I was 2 hours east in Columbus. We called her. We visited when we could. We were her sons, not her caretakers, because she didn't need caretakers. Then she turned 81, and she had a small stroke. It wasn't catastrophic. She recovered most of her function within a few weeks. But it scared her, and it scared us, and it opened a door that I wish now I had fought harder to keep closed. Raymond and Connie offered to move in with her. Temporarily, they said, just to help her get back on her feet. My mother resisted at first, the way she resisted any suggestion that she might need help. But Connie was persuasive, and eventually my mother agreed. Temporarily became 6 months. 6 months became a year. By the time I fully understood what was happening, Raymond and Connie had quietly made themselves indispensable. Connie handled my mother's finances. Raymond managed the sale of the hardware store, which my mother decided she didn't want the burden of anymore. It sold for $412,000. Raymond deposited it into a joint account he had set up with my mother, for convenience, he said, so he could pay her bills and not have to call her every time a check needed to be written. I thought that was reasonable at the time. I am ashamed that I thought it was reasonable. The calls to me became less frequent. When I visited, Connie was always there, always pleasant, always just slightly in the way. My mother seemed well, happy enough. I told myself everything was fine. Then, 2 years ago, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. Not from her cell phone, which Connie helped her manage, but from the old landline in the kitchen, the one with the cord, that she had kept because she said cordless phones felt like talking to the air. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Douglas," she said, "I want you to come visit. Just you. Can you come next weekend?" I said, of course. I asked if everything was all right. She paused. "There are things I want to tell you," she said. "Things I should have said a long time ago. I never made it." 2 days later, Connie called me. She said my mother had had another, more serious stroke and had been hospitalized. By the time I drove up to Dayton, my mother was in a memory care facility, assessed as cognitively impaired, and Raymond had already filed paperwork with the court establishing himself as her sole legal guardian. He had not told me. He had not called me or consulted me or so much as sent a text message. He had simply done it. And by the time I arrived, there was a signature on a legal form that essentially removed me from any decision-making in my mother's care. I tried to fight it. I hired a lawyer. Raymond's attorney argued that the process had been followed correctly, that my mother had agreed to the guardianship during a window of clarity before her cognitive decline, and that adding a second guardian who lived 2 hours away and was not involved in her daily care was unnecessary and potentially disruptive to her routine. The court agreed with Raymond. I was allowed to visit my mother twice a month on a schedule approved by my brother. I sat with her in a room that smelled like disinfectant and artificial flowers, held her hand, and watched her struggle to pull my name to the surface. She died 14 months later, a Thursday morning in early September. Connie called me at 9:15 to let me know. The funeral was arranged before I had any input. The headstone design, the flowers, the readings, all decided by Raymond and Connie. I stood at the graveside of my mother like a distant relative, someone who had known her once but not well. And then, 3 weeks later, Raymond emailed me a copy of the amended will. He had had it drawn up in the spring of the previous year, he said, when their mother was still clear-minded enough to make her wishes known. It superseded the original document. In it, she left the house, the investment account, the remaining savings, and all personal property to Raymond and Connie. To me, she left the box of photographs and the sewing kit. Raymond called me after he sent the email. His voice was careful and even. He said he knew this was hard to hear. He said their mother had her reasons. He said there was no point in making things uglier than they already were. I listened to all of it without saying a single word. Then I called Gerald Fitch. Let me tell you what Gerald found in the first 30 days. The amended will had been executed in April of the prior year. At that time, my mother had already been diagnosed with moderate-stage vascular dementia. Her own physician had noted in her medical records, 4 months before the will was signed, that she lacked the capacity to make complex financial or legal decisions independently, and that any such decisions should be reviewed by a court-appointed evaluator. No court-appointed evaluator had reviewed the amended will. Raymond's attorney had used a notary and 2 witnesses, both of whom, Gerald discovered, were friends of Connie's from her book club. That was the first problem. The second was the money. Gerald hired a forensic accountant named Sylvia Torres to review 3 years of financial records. What Sylvia found took her 2 weeks to document and 17 pages to explain. In the 38 months between when Raymond established the joint account with my mother and when she entered the memory care facility, $261,000 had been transferred out of that account in increments small enough to avoid automatic bank scrutiny. The money went to a personal account in Connie's name, to 2 credit cards Raymond and Connie shared, and to a down payment on a vacation property in Tennessee that was titled in Connie's sister's name. $261,000. from a woman on a fixed income who thought her son was paying her electric bill. I sat in Gerald's office the evening Sylvia presented her findings, and I did not speak for a very long time. Gerald gave me the space to be silent. Outside his window, Columbus was doing what Columbus does in October, going about its ordinary life as if nothing unusual was happening anywhere. She trusted him, I finally said. Gerald nodded. She called me 2 years ago, I said. She wanted to tell me something. And I didn't get there in time. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Douglas, there are letters." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were 6 envelopes, all addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, all unsealed, all undated. They had been found by the director of the memory care facility when she was sorting through my mother's personal belongings after her death. The director had held on to them, uncertain who they should go to, until Gerald's investigator had reached out. My mother had written to me 6 times over the course of 14 months and had never been able to send the letters. I do not know if she forgot. I do not know if someone prevented her. I do not know, and I will never know. And that is something I am going to have to make peace with for the rest of my life. I read all 6 letters in Gerald's office that night. I will not tell you everything she wrote, because some of it belongs only to me. But in the 3rd letter, dated about 8 months before she died, she had written this. She said she knew that Raymond and Connie had been taking from her. She said she had noticed things going missing from her account when she still had moments of clarity. She said she was frightened, and she did not know what to do. She said she was sorry that she had let it go on so long without telling me. She said she hoped I would not think less of her for being afraid. I cried in that office in a way I have not cried since my father's funeral. Not composed, dignified tears, the kind men my age have been trained to produce in public. Real crying. The kind that comes from the center of something. Gerald sat across the desk and let me. When I was done, I asked him what we were going to do. He said, "We're going to walk into that conference room with everything we have, and we're going to let them believe they've already won." I was good at that. I had been practicing for 14 months. Back in the conference room, Patricia Holloway had composed herself. She was a professional, and she recovered quickly. She said that anything we wished to submit should have been filed with the probate court in advance of this meeting, and that she wasn't sure what the purpose of a last-minute document was. Gerald said, with complete politeness, that these materials had only recently come into our possession and that we were prepared to file them formally today, or we could allow everyone in this room to review them first and decide whether a formal filing was in everyone's best interest. He looked at Raymond when he said that last part. Raymond looked at the folder. Connie, who had said nothing since we sat down, was looking at her hands. Patricia Holloway said she needed a moment to confer with her clients. Gerald said, of course. We stood, stepped into the hallway, and waited. We waited 11 minutes. I know because I counted. When we went back in, Patricia Holloway's posture had changed. Still professional, but something was different behind her eyes, some calculation that had shifted. "Mr. Briggs," she said, addressing Raymond, "do you want to tell me what's in that folder?" Raymond's jaw tightened. He said he didn't know what Gerald was trying to pull. Gerald opened the folder and laid 3 documents on the table. The medical evaluation from my mother's physician establishing cognitive impairment prior to the amended will, a summary of Sylvia Torres's forensic accounting findings, and a letter from the district attorney's office, which Gerald had sent a preliminary report to the previous week, acknowledging receipt and indicating the matter was under review. The sound Connie made when she saw that last document was not a word. It was something smaller than a word. Raymond stood up. He said this was harassment. He said he had done nothing wrong, that he had cared for their mother for 3 years while I was nowhere to be found, that everything he did was for her benefit. His voice was rising. "Raymond," I said. And he stopped. Because I almost never say anything in a raised voice, and something in the quietness of it reached him. I looked at my brother across that conference table. The same brother I had grown up with, who I had shared a room with until he was 12, who stood at the back of the church at my wedding because he had the wrong shoes on and was embarrassed. The same brother who had called me when his first child was born and cried on the phone because he didn't know what to do with something that small and that perfect. I looked at him and I did not feel what I had expected to feel. I had expected satisfaction. Some version of the feeling you get when the right thing finally happens after a long time of the wrong thing happening. But standing there, what I mostly felt was tired and sad in a way I don't have a better word for. "Raymond," I said again, more quietly. She wrote to me. She wrote to me 6 times, and I only found the letters last month. She knew what you were doing. She was scared and she didn't tell anyone, and she died scared. And I don't know how you live with that, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. Raymond sat down. The anger went out of him, the way air goes out of something when it deflates. He looked suddenly older than I remembered him being. Smaller. Connie was crying, or something close to it. Patricia Holloway said, very quietly, that perhaps we should take a short recess. We did not take a recess. What happened instead was this. Gerald laid out what we were prepared to do. We would be filing a formal challenge to the amended will based on the medical evaluation showing my mother lacked testamentary capacity at the time of signing. We would be requesting a full forensic audit of my mother's finances going back 4 years. We would be cooperating fully with the district attorney's office in whatever direction their inquiry took. And then Gerald said, the part that surprised even me, because I had asked him to include it and he had told me it was unusual, and I had said unusual was fine. He said, however, that I was not seeking prison time for my brother, that I was not asking the court for punitive damages, that what I was seeking was the restoration of my mother's estate to what it should have been under her original will, and an accounting of the missing funds. Patricia Holloway looked at me. She had not expected that. Raymond looked at me. He had definitely not expected that. "I'm 64 years old," I said. "My mother is gone. Sending Raymond to prison doesn't bring her back and it doesn't undo any of it. But those funds belong to her, and they should be accounted for. And the amended will that was drawn up when she couldn't legally consent to it should not stand." What followed was not dramatic. The law is rarely dramatic. There were filings and hearings and a mediated settlement that took 4 months to finalize. Raymond did not go to prison, though he came closer than he probably understood for a while there. He and Connie entered into a repayment agreement, the details of which I am not going to share because, frankly, they are tedious and because the amount, while significant, does not come close to covering what they took in non-monetary terms from my mother. The amended will was invalidated. The original will was reinstated. Raymond and I each received an equal share of our mother's estate, as my father had intended. The house on Clearwater Drive I had sold. I couldn't keep it. Too many rooms that felt like they still held something that should not have been left behind. I used part of my share to establish a small scholarship at the technical college my father had attended in his name and my mother's. The first recipient was a 20-year-old kid studying electrical systems. My father would have liked that. I want to tell you what happened with Raymond, because I think that part matters. We did not speak for the 8 months. The legal proceedings were ongoing. His attorneys communicated with mine. We were not in the same room again until the day the settlement was signed, in a different law office with different furniture that still managed to look exactly the same. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. Thinner. The confident ease he had always moved through the world with was gone, and what was underneath it was something I recognized from when we were kids. He was the younger brother who had never quite believed he was enough, had never quite felt like he had caught up. I don't say that to excuse him. I say it because understanding something is not the same as forgiving it, and I think people sometimes confuse those two things. After the paperwork was signed, he followed me out into the parking lot. I heard his footsteps, and I stopped walking, and I turned around. He said, "I know there's nothing I can say." I said, "That's probably right." He said, "I'm sorry about the letters. I didn't know about the letters." I don't know if that's true. I will never know. But I looked at my brother's face, and I made a choice that surprised me. I said, "The kids didn't do any of this. His daughter, my niece, she is 26. His son, my nephew, is 23. Neither of them had any idea what their parents had been doing. Both of them called me during the proceedings, separately, to apologize for something that was not their fault. Raymond said, "No, they didn't." I said, "I'll be at Tyler's graduation in the spring if he wants me there." Raymond didn't say anything. He just nodded, and his eyes got glassy, and then he walked back to his car. I am not saying I have forgiven my brother. I am saying I have decided not to let what he did define the remaining years of my life or the relationship I have with his children, who are innocent of everything except being born to the wrong parents in the wrong season of those parents' lives. Tyler's graduation was in May. I sat 3 rows behind his family. He found me afterward in the crowd and hugged me and said, "Thanks for coming, Uncle Doug. I'm glad you're here." My mother would have been glad too, that much I know. There's a photograph on my desk now, framed. My mother in the backyard of the house on Clearwater Drive, probably 1984, based on what she's wearing. She is laughing at something off camera. Whatever it was must have been genuinely funny, because the laugh is real. You can tell the difference, after 64 years, between someone performing happiness and someone actually inside it. She was inside it in that photograph. The letters she wrote to me are in a box in my closet. I have read them many times. I will probably read them many times more. The third one, the one where she says she was afraid, I have read more than the others. Not because it is the one that hurts the most, though it is. Because it ends the way she always ended her letters to me, even when I was grown and it seemed like a strange thing to still write. She wrote, "I love you more than you probably know, and I am proud of you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you've accomplished and everything to do with who you are." I don't know the exact circumstances of her last months. I don't know all the conversations she had or didn't have or tried to have. I know she was afraid and that she tried to reach me and that by the time help arrived it was too late to give her back any of what had been taken. What I have left is this. I have her voice on a voicemail I saved from 5 years ago that I listen to sometimes when I need to hear her. I have those 6 letters. I have the photograph on my desk. I have a niece and nephew who still return my calls. And I have the knowledge that when the moment came, I told the truth and I did not let fear or grief or exhaustion talk me into accepting something I knew was wrong. My father used to say that integrity is not what you do when someone is watching. Anybody can behave themselves in public. Integrity is what you do in the dark, when no one will ever know and it would be easier to do otherwise. I sat with that idea for a long time in the months after my mother died. I thought about all the points along the way where Raymond might have made a different choice, where Connie might have said, "This is too far, let's stop," where any number of small decisions might have led to a different November morning in that conference room. And I thought about my own choices. The visits I didn't make, the questions I didn't ask, the easy comfort of assuming that no news meant good news. I have had to sit with that, too. The part of this story where I was not the villain, but I was not paying enough attention either. That's a harder thing to talk about. It's easier to tell the story of what someone did to you than to tell the honest version, which includes the things you let happen out of complacency. If you're watching this and you have a parent getting older, or a sibling who has quietly taken on a caretaker role that is giving them access to things they shouldn't have unsupervised access to, I want you to hear this part more than any other part. Do not assume love is enough to prevent exploitation. Do not assume that because someone is family, they are incapable of harming another family member for financial gain. Have the uncomfortable conversations. Ask to see the documents. Trust the instinct that tells you something is off. My mother's instincts were right. She noticed. She tried to tell me. I didn't get there in time. Don't let that be your story. I want to tell you one last thing, and then I have to go, because my nephew Tyler is coming over for dinner tonight and I promised I would grill, which at this point in November in Ohio is stubbornness dressed up as a hobby, but some habits are worth keeping. A few weeks after the settlement was finalized, I was going through the last of the boxes from my mother's house. The estate sale had been held. The furniture was gone. I was looking for a specific photograph I remembered from childhood, the one of my parents on their wedding day, which I wanted to have properly framed. I found it in the bottom of a shoebox wrapped in a piece of the same floral fabric my mother used to line her dresser drawers with. She had kept it safe all those years. Kept it wrapped up so nothing could happen to it. Underneath the photograph was a small note card I had not seen before. It was not addressed to anyone. It had no date. In her handwriting, slightly unsteady, the way it got toward the end, she had written 4 words. "The truth finds you." I stood in that empty house for a long time holding that note card. I do not know when she wrote it or what she was thinking about when she wrote it. But she was right. It does. The truth does not always arrive early enough. It does not always arrive in time to protect the people who deserved protecting. But it finds you, and when it does, you have a choice about what to do with it. I chose to do something with it. I think she would have too. If you stayed with me until the end of this, thank you for being here. If something in this story felt familiar, I hope you find your way to the truth before it's too late to use it. And if you're carrying something right now that you haven't said out loud yet, consider saying it. To someone. To a lawyer. To a camera, if nothing else. My mother wrote 6 letters she never sent. I don't want you to write 6 letters you never send. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to let the quiet version of events be the final version. I'll see you in the next one.